Welcome, everybody, to the latest edition of Couch Potato Theater here on the Fandom Podcast Network. This is the show where we celebrate our favorite films, and we've got a special one tonight. We've got to do this podcast, this particular movie. You need to make sure you have a little thunder in your heart and your moves are like lightning. And you know what? I can't do it alone because the movie we're talking about is the 1986 BMX classic RAD. And I got a couple rad people with me, including one, you know what, I would go ass sliding with anytime. He is the co-founder of the Fandom Podcast Network, my brother from another mother, Mr. Kevin Reitzel.
Should we clarify what it means by ass sliding?
We probably should. We will do that later in the podcast.
Good to hear. I'm excited. This movie has a certain moment of nostalgia for both of us, and I'm excited to jump into that.
Oh yes, this is a nostalgia-ridden, close to my heart, guilty pleasure kind of film. But we got one more here. We can't do Couch Potato Theater without the queen of movie foo, and some might even call her the queen of bicycle boogie. The one, the only, Miss Lacey Adderholt.
Hello.
Are you ready to get rad, Lacey?
I'm definitely ready to get rad. I feel that this is their skills far outshine mine, but I'm with them in spirit.
And I like where Lacey is right now because Kyle, we've been there, and it was rad.
It was very rad, and we're going to get into that here shortly. But we are talking about the 1986 movie RAD here on the latest edition of Couch Potato Theater, and we are going to have some fun with this. I found some interesting stuff about this movie, and we have a very unique perspective about this particular Couch Potato Theater, which we will get into shortly. But guys, RAD came out in 1986 at the height of the BMX craze. Lori Loughlin, a very young Lori Loughlin in this film. Just something that was definitely, Kevin, it took a slice of pie from the 1980s that was a very crucial thing to a lot of people, and that was the BMX culture.
Yeah, this was huge. If you were of age at this time, especially in certain areas of the country, like specifically for me, you couldn't escape the BMX culture because it tied into obviously the skateboarding culture as well, which was blown up here in Southern California. And you were starting to see it not only in commercials, you're starting to see it in movies like this. And also, too, you guys got to look back, too, when it came to being a fan of being in the BMX rage. It started before this movie came out. And one of the movies that really kind of got us excited about being on bikes, too, and friends and stuff like that is E.T. I remember when E.T. came out, it was a big deal for us bike riders because that's what E.T. Elliott and his friends had, and they were escaping the cops and the government. It was really, really cool. And then it, you started seeing stuff just blow up with this world of BMX, and then of course culminated here with this film RAD.
Mm-hmm.
Well, guys, I don't even want to wait. I want to get into this movie. We're going to have a ton of fun with this. So it is time for the Movie Time Cinema, which of course kicks off with the IMDb possibly vague and not always spot on plot description. So here is the plot description according to IMDb of RAD. The story of Cru Jones, a young man who can overcome all obstacles that prevent him from participating in the BMX race Helltrack. As he works towards his dream, Cru falls in love with Christian, an amateur racer. With the help of Christian and her friends, can Cru's RAD racing team defeat the top BMX factory rider Bart Taylor? What do you think, guys? Think IMDb got this one right?
Yeah, it's pretty spot on. It's left out some details, but that's what it does. What do you think, Lacey?
I think it's all right. I think it's not bad. I think it gives a bit to the imagination, unlike the trailers from today, where you watch a 2.5-minute trailer and it's just like you don't have to watch the movie anymore.
That's true. Very true. Yeah. Well, this movie was released on March 28th, 1986. It had a budget of $3 million, yet its worldwide gross was only just slightly over $2 million. So, unfortunately, RAD was obviously not that rad in the theaters. But I think it's safe to say this movie kind of got a cult following thanks to the VHS release of it. And they're just, like I said, this is one of those movies that just takes that a certain niche from the 80s and puts it right there for everybody to love. And speaking of that, guys, we're going to talk about when was the last time we seen this movie? And this is going to be a little different because, guys, we saw this movie all together. We recently were in Atlanta. If you have followed us on social media, hanging out at the very special Adderhold Theater in Atlanta, and we watched together RAD on Blu-ray in the Adderhold Theater. And guys, it was
that specific Blu-ray that she has in her hand.
Man.
We watched this movie right here, this actual movie.
And it was great because it was the first time, I think it's the first time the three of us were together watching a movie. So,
yeah, it was cool. I was out there visiting, of course, my daughter for her birthday week, and
Shout
friends
out
and
to
family.
Camille.
Yeah, Camille.
oh,
And then Kyle, you came up to hang out, and we had a fun time in the what if we were to call Lacey's theater room a name, cinema pants? I don't know what would we call it. Lacey pants.
I don't know. I usually just refer to it as the nerd cave. Once you get to the staircase to come downstairs, it's just the nerd cave.
Yeah, we got to watch this movie together. And Lacey, I think this was the first time you'd seen it, or am I?
No, I had seen it a million years ago, but I didn't remember. Like, I literally didn't even remember that Lori Loughlin was. Like, I didn't remember anything.
It was fun with your reaction. Anyway, I'll let you go into it. But it was like watching someone who hadn't either seen it at all.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
So funny. My funny thing is, I loved this movie as a kid. And it was one of those movies that you could not find for forever, and it disappeared off of cable for a very long time. And then there was some really small DVD company got the rights to it and put it out on DVD and Blu-ray, and then eventually it's now out available on iTunes as well. But Kevin, I know where you got your copy of RAD.
Yeah, it was a gift from this awesome guy right there. If the finger's pointing the right direction, if not there. What's so funny too, though, is as I'm looking at it, though, I'm going like, did you say it was done by Mill Creek?
The Blu-ray is, I don't know, what's on the spine for yours?
It just says DVD, but the way that it looks, it could be Sus Creek.
There you go. Okay.
I don't care. I love the cover of the original poster and stuff, and it was a gift from my good friend Kyle here. It was awesome.
Yes. And you know what? It was when I found it out as like one. I bought the movie, and then I found the soundtrack on iTunes, and we're going to talk about the soundtrack later. This is just one of those movies that's just so of its time, and when we watched it together, there was a lot of pausing as we were checking out certain things.
Oh, yes.
There were pauses, there were rewinds. We had to go back and listen to full songs again. We had to like slow-mo some stuff. Like
I believe we even paused to try to figure out a couple comic book covers in the comic book rack.
Yes, there was a certain G.I. Joe comic that I had to find out about.
But guys, it is time to get into the movie discussion here. But before we get into that movie discussion, we need to have a little discussion about the BMX phenomenon. If you were a kid in the late 70s through the mid 80s, BMX was a thing, and it was a very legitimate thing. And it starts right here. I'm actually pulling a related article, The Totally Rad Fad of 1980s BMX. This is from flashback.com. The odd little bikes don't look rideable by anyone over 12 years old, and they are, in point of fact, designed for children. But no one who rides a BMX, and no, it's not BMX bike since the B in BMX stands for bicycle, ever sits down on one unless they're posing for a photo. The bikes are made for stunting and soaring, tiny platforms for airborne maneuvers in imitation of motocross moves without the motor. Born out of the 70s motorcycle race scene in Southern California as kids tried to emulate the adults on their own dirt bikes, BMX was a sport created by kids for kids, explains John David, COO of USA BMX. It didn't stay that way, though. BMX soon became a serious sport for grown-ups, and in 2003, an Olympic event. Bike motocross is back in a big way. You thought you might not know it if you aren't part of a bike subculture, but if you lived in the early 1980s, there was no getting around that extreme popularity of BMX. The bikes were everywhere, in stores, in magazines, on television, in iconic scenes in movies like E.T., The Goonies, and of course the BMX exploitation movies of RAD and BMX Bandits, which of course starred a 15-year-old Nicole Kidman, released in 1986 and 1983 respectively. Now, Kevin, we see it here, Team Mongoose. We go along here. We've got Kurokawa, welcome to the big league, Schwinn with their BMX bikes. More Mongoose. It's the style of the suits, and of course, a lot for me. I actually had a Huffy racing bike back in the day, but Kevin, I'm going to ask you because you were in California for a BMX thing. The BMX love was for real in the 80s.
Oh, it was huge, and it was one of those things too where it was a way that you styled your bike too. If you had a certain name brand bike, of course, and a certain color, you had to make sure you had all the cool color accents as well. It was one of those things. And it was like, we came off 10 speeds, basically being the most popular bike in the world in the 70s, with those weird, like ram shaped under, what do you call it? Handlebars and stuff like that. Or you had those cruiser bikes with a big banana seat and all those kind of things. And this was kind of like the futuristic way of bike riding. And I remember too, like the article said, you had E.T., you had Goonies, you had all your heroes riding bikes and stuff. And this was a big deal. And I remember, getting my first bike of this type and fixing it up and making it look as cool as I could. Because a lot of kids had to do that because they couldn't afford some of these really expensive bikes at the time. But piece by piece of the accessories, you could, whether you were mowing lawns or doing paper routes, among other things.
Yeah. Now, Kevin, let's go down the quick checklist. You had to have the right pads.
Yep.
You had to have the pegs, probably front and back pegs. And of course, the most important aspect, and it was usually the most expensive piece of the bike, you had to have the mag wheels.
Well, it's interesting. It depends on, and this is where you kind of found out what type of BMXer you were. There was obviously the famous kids that, of course, could do the tricks, and then they would do the racing. Or some would just do racing. And if you couldn't get to a place that did racing, you did the tricks. And it depends if you had like how many brakes. Did you have front and back brakes? Because a lot of the trick riders would have both, obviously, because of the way that they had to make sure that all the brakes would work for the tricks and all that kind of stuff, And so there's all these other little things too, and you had the pad going down the center, the main center, what is it? The frame, I guess, and then you had like the little pad around where you tie the gooseneck, basically. You had that. And then, but the big deal was what type of rims did you have? And the mag rims without the spokes were the most popular for a lot of reasons. And, it depends too, like, were they graphite, or were they made out of what the material that they were made out of? They're supposed to be lighter, God, there's just so many other little, things with different names and nomenclatures that you had to realize and pick it up, and it's amazing to see what some of these original bikes go for now that they're in good shape.
Yeah. So speaking of, for this particular podcast, Kevin has his own Red Ryder BB gun version of BMX that he wants. Ladies and gentlemen, I introduce you to the Red Line.
The 1985 Redline Chrome with mag wheels was my dream bike because I knew a guy that had a Redline. And it was very similar to this bike that we have in the picture. If you're listening to this audio podcast and you know what we're talking about, that's great. But if you're not sure, make sure you check out the video because we're showing pictures of this. Redline was a bike that I wanted, and I had a friend of mine that had one. Unfortunately, I never had one because it was also very expensive. But I remember decking out the whatever generic bike that I had to as close as I could. Of course, I didn't get the mag wheels, but I did have everything else in red and the different colored, was it the seat post? Weren't they like aluminum something, whatever it was to make them lighter? I couldn't remember, but yeah, the Redline was my dream bike that I wanted, and I did not get one for Christmas, unfortunately. What about you, Kyle?
I had a Huffy, and the only thing I really wanted was mag wheels, but My dad was like, "No, I am not investing in mag wheels. Your bike will get stolen if you have mag wheels. And we're just not doing that." So yeah, but the good thing about the BMX in Alaska was when it was not wintertime, because you always had these man-made dirt piles filled up from all the snow, and then when it melted, it'd leave these huge dirt piles, and there was people just wiping themselves out trying to do BMX tricks on these dirt piles.
And also too, we were going to whether it was the bookstore or the magazine rack at your fast food or your convenience stores. Like for us, it was 7-Eleven. Yeah. You'd see like BMX related magazines, and we were also seeing it in our comic books too. And I just want to give a shout out to my friend Aaron Head Moss, who runs the G.I. Joe, A Real American Headcast. I was on his podcast yesterday, and we were looking at G.I. Joe from the original Marvel series, issue number 57, I believe that it was. It's the one where Flint and Lady J team up with Destro. The reason why I bring that up is because there's an ad on the very back cover of, I think it was I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was a team something by BMX basically, and it had like 4 of the best riders that were being sponsored by this bicycle group here, and they all had the cool like racing outfits with the pads and all that kind of stuff. And and there's a tie-in to this movie as well with G.I. Joe we can get into a little bit later, but it was everywhere, Kyle. And then you had the stickers you could get and put on everything. It was just, as a kid, whether it was printed material or even commercials, you just could not get away with it, because going to school, people were riding their bikes to school and locking them up together, and also getting stolen if you weren't careful. It was definitely one of those things that was popular and getting stolen around certain neighborhoods.
Yeah. Well, what about you, Lacey? Where you were at? Was there any feel of the BMX culture?
So I'm in Georgia. I've been in Georgia for 50 years. The thing is, the South is usually about 7 to 10 years behind everybody else. Or at least back in the day it was. So we were still like super into roller skates at this time. I did have a Huffy, but it was a banana seat with I had like the streamers on the edge of the handlebars, and like the little glow in the dark things that you put on the spokes, like the little spoke things or whatever. So I had a fancy bike, but there were no tricks to be had. Also, it should be stated that if anyone ever sees me get in on any sort of vehicle that is man-powered, that has wheels, you should tell me to get off, because I fall down a lot. And usually it involves a broken bone or 3. Yeah. So I'm not great with like strapping wheels to myself.
Yeah. So now that we've kind of explained the BMX culture here, guys, let's talk about the movie itself, because I mean, this movie bleeds BMX. Small town boy making good story. For me, what's just so fun about this movie is just, it's such a nostalgia ride. And it's everything. It's seeing the BMX, seeing the Helltrack at the end, which we'll get to. But just everything with this movie is like, yeah, if I lived in this area, this is probably these are the people I would be hanging out with and having fun with. But Kevin, I mean, if we everybody knows we love our 80s films around here. If this movie doesn't scream 80s, I don't know what does.
Yeah, it's true. It's fun to do what we do here as podcasters and look back on these old films and then, record and talk about them and bring them to you. And it's interesting because when it comes to the 80s movies, there's a certain subculture of movies, where that movie is so 80s. And this is definitely one that falls into it. Another one that falls into it too is a podcast that we did here for Couch Potato Theater that I did with my wife. It was Tough Turf, and that one was so 80s for many reasons, and things that really make things so 80s that we'll get into here is, first of all, what were they wearing? What was the music? Was there a montage? Was there more than one? There's all kind of things that just make it totally 80s, especially like the soundtrack. Did it have a soundtrack that just really did it with it? And also too, as I said, the style. And we have to shout out, if you're watching the podcast, I got a little RAD shirt going on here. I think Lacey's got RAD Racing shirt. Like that one is fresh off the print run there of the film. Yeah.
Yep.
But yeah, to get to their point there, Kyle, this RAD just hits a chord so 80s, and we'll get into that, of course.
Lacey, what about for you watching this? So is it the nostalgia factor, or is it even a little bit more?
It's the, oh my gosh, it's the clothes, it's the dialogue. The dialogue, man, like sometimes, I mean, that some of that dialogue is just like painful. It's so good. Don't get me wrong. It's like so good, but you're just like, oh my God, that's so 80s, because it's one of those things where, you know, up until the mid 90s, everything was kind of spoon fed to you. You know, films had to be written a very specific way, or the studios didn't have faith in them to, you know, appeal to the masses. And because at that time, the masses had a third grade reading level, which is why the Wall Street Journal is still written at a fifth grade reading level today. But it's interesting because just the dialogue, the clothing, it's definitely a nostalgia trip. The hair, oh my gosh, the hair. Like, and most of it's like the mom, like the parent stuff, like, cause I wasn't at the same time, I wasn't the same age as the kids. Right. So I'm looking at the parents and going, oh, my mom had that haircut, or, oh, the lady on the street, you know, that kind of thing. So, but yeah, definitely nostalgic.
Very much so. But guys, speaking of nostalgic, let's talk about some movie reviews for RAD. Now, I'll be honest with you, it was not easy finding movie reviews for RAD. There was no Roger Ebert review, no Gene Siskel review, but I did find a few interesting things. This film received mixed reviews and underperformed commercially during its release. The New York Times stated teenagers' ears may not split from the music or ache from the dialogue, but anybody over 20 beware. You're willing to sacrifice building a solid future for a bicycle race, says the hero's mother. It's very self-destructive. If only he had listened to mom, but who can blame him for preferring his bicycle? On the website Rotten Tomatoes, RAD has been given an approval rating of 42% based on 12 critics' reviews. In 2013, The Guardian writer Nick Evershed found it had the largest discrepancy between critical and audience response, which at the time was 0% based on 5 reviews versus 91% based on 7,165 user ratings in the Rotten Tomatoes database from a pool of 10,000 movies analyzed. Metacritic gives this film a score of 24 out of 100 based on reviews from 6 critics indicating generally unfavorable reviews. Now, film historian Leonard Maltin, I think we all, if you're any kind of movie buff, you know who Leonard Maltin is.
This is the only time I've been mad at him.
Gave the movie a bomb citation, the lowest possible rating in his annual movie guide, explaining title is supposed to be short for radical, as in radical man. Yeah, right. And we didn't see this same plot line used to death by the 1950s hot rod films and also by the 1970s roller disco epics. Now, in my research, I did find a very interesting review on the Movie John website, which they did a review in retrospect written by Nicholas Nelson. I pulled a quote from this. RAD is Footloose from 1984, but with BMX, down to the Kenny Loggins' I'm Free-ish song that opens and closes the film, and even a scene where they dance with their bikes on a dance floor at a dance. It's also part Rocky. Of all people, Talia Shire plays the mother who thinks BMX is a waste of time. Other familiar faces include Lori Loughlin as his love interest and Ray Walston as a.k.a. Mr. Hand from Fast Times at Ridgemont High. If you grew up in this era, it's really a fun nostalgia bomb, but I think it's definitely suited exclusively for that core audience. So, obviously, Kevin, you said you were mad at Leonard Maltin, but I think Nicholas Nelson might actually be on to something here a little bit. It's definitely slated for a particular group of people. But
yeah, it is. It hits it. You know, it's trying to introduce a breakdance movie to a certain culture that's not used to it or didn't, you know, wasn't around it. That type of thing. It hits a certain type of culture, and rewatching it, I'm going like I can understand why the critics are in it, but it wasn't for the critics. That's the thing. And when parents are reading up on the newspaper or whatever it is, articles, in magazines and stuff like this, and they're reading and hearing these critics say this stuff, the parents have to understand too at the time that like the kids don't give a crap about this. We're seeing this movie because we're seeing our lives up on screen, especially if we were into that. And I don't know if we touched on it. I know we talked about when we recently saw this film together, but I don't remember seeing this movie in the theater, to be perfectly honest with you. I remember wanting to, but I might have been in a limited release where I was, and I had to wait for VHS later on when it came out. It might have been on also, broadcast television, because we didn't have HBO at the time.
Yeah, I saw this on video, and I don't remember ever it hitting the theaters either. But again, it didn't have that kind of release. I think that big film side. Lacey, I'm going to ask you, any insight on these reviews?
I think he's right about the Footloose thing. I would have compared it to Breakin', the first Breakin'.
Yeah.
I mean, the small town kids trying to, get past the corporate, whatever. But yeah, that works. I think it's just, if you don't have the interest, then you're not, I don't think Moulton really was a BMX guy. I don't think that this movie wasn't for him. This was not, built for anyone other than the BMX folks,
It's kind of shown it to your stuffy grandparents or even parents at the time that know nothing about it. They're like, what are these kids doing? What is this? So they turn their nose up at it.
Yep.
Well, guys, I also have a little movie trivia. Yeah, I found a few interesting pieces of trivia. Kevin, you actually enlightened Lacey and I to this piece of trivia while we were watching the movie, as you were looking up some things.
Mm-hmm.
Filming was delayed because the Helltrack starting ramp was so high that none of the actual riders wanted to go down it. The ramp was cut down to a 25-foot tall version. BMX Plus magazine published an article about it.
Yeah, when you watch this movie and you see this starting ramp, it's pretty intense. And as a wannabe hot rod BMXer at the time, I don't know if I would even gone down the finished ramp, because that was pretty intense. And what a way to start a race too.
Yeah. Thank you, but no thank you. But Bart Taylor, played by gymnast and Olympic gold medalist Bart Connors, was quoted as saying he's received much more celebrity notoriety from RAD than he did winning gold medals in the Olympics.
Yeah, no one remembers the Olympics he was in. I'm sorry. No one cares. It's all about this movie.
As the film's original title was Balls Out, the phrase was actually used in the movie when Sergeant Smith talks to Cru before the race. He tells him to go balls out.
It's funny. Every time I hear the name of the movie that we're watching in the actual movie, I always think of the memes that come out like, oh, he said it, he said it, or they said it, the video of, was it Family Guy? He says, oh, look, they said it. Or you see the famous meme with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood with Leonardo DiCaprio's character pointing at the screen.
Yeah. Bill Allen, who played Cru Jones, later wrote a book entitled My Rad Career, and that sound you're hearing is Kevin and Lacey typing on their computers, looking it up on Amazon. Kevin's looking for the audiobook in particular.
God, it's like he knows me so well. And I both hold up our hands right now going, no, we're not.
But here is the most interesting piece of trivia I found, and I talked a little bit about this in the open. The film went 34 years between official releases. It was released on VHS by Embassy Home Entertainment in 1986. It did not get an official DVD release, although there were bootlegs sold on eBay and Amazon with the INHD channel watermark on it. It was released on 4K in 2020 by Vinegar Syndrome and Blu-ray by Mondo in 2021. So, yeah, RAD has been a little hard to come by until recent years. But guys, we have more things to talk about here. Now, this is where we would talk about movie quotes, but let's be honest, there wasn't a lot of huge quotes about this movie, except, this is ass sliding, Kevin.
Yeah, and the definitely the one you just mentioned earlier too, the quote where go balls out.
Go balls out.
And I can't imagine this film doing much better with a title like that. So it was definitely a smart move to keep to the original title, though.
Though I will admit that maybe the best quote of the movie wasn't a quote, but the fact you see Ray Walston flip off the main villain of the movie.
Didn't he do it more than once? I think it was like starting to become a thing, you know.
Well, speaking of Ray Walston, let's talk about the cast and the crew here, because this is a very interesting cast when you really look at it, because there's some interesting people in this cast. Kevin, we've got Bill Allen, who played Cru, really didn't have much of a career after this. Of course, Lori Loughlin, most famously known as Aunt Becky from Full House, one of her early movies. Talia Shire is in this movie. Adrian herself is RAD. Of course, we discussed Ray Walston, and also Jack Weston, the very famous, more of a character actor than anything, plays Duke Best. And then again, Olympian Bart Connor plays Bart Taylor, the rival to Cru Jones in this film. Guys, I just got to get your thoughts on some of this cast, because it's a very unique cast for this particular movie. Lacey.
Well, when I watched it with you guys, because last time I saw it was a million years ago, and it was probably on channel 48 at 2:00 in the morning. But I was impressed at the number of actual, when I looked it up afterwards, the number of actual BMXers that were in it, because if you think about putting together a movie today about any sport, like the number of, if you were doing a scripted film about a sport, you might be lucky to get one, maybe two as cameos. But the number of actual BMXers that were in this it was pretty impressive.
Yeah, there was a lot of actual BMX racers in this, Kevin.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm not as familiar with them as I used to be, but back in the day when you were like seeing some of your BMX heroes, and same thing with like the skateboard heroes that I remember seeing for example, Tony Hawk in Gleaming the Cube. That was a big deal, And I want to say that this movie here, including Secret Admirer, was where my Lori Loughlin crush started. She definitely had like the girl next door, and I still crush on her, to be honest with you. I've always been a fan of hers, and she's definitely the standout for several reasons in this film that we'll get into some other segments here. But what's funny is that there's a movie trope that was really kind of big. Maybe it started in, I remember seeing a lot in the 80s. It probably started earlier than that, called the wet blanket character. The parent or the girlfriend or boyfriend that was like, no, you can't do this, and blah, blah, blah. And Talia Shire's Mrs. Jones was the typical wet blanket character, the mother that didn't believe in, wanted the son to, get a real job and do that kind of stuff. And she came across as that. So she's not really likable, but that there's the turn. You're waiting for the turn, and you don't get that until a bit later on. But for me, other than, a lot, our lead BMXers, though, I loved seeing Ray Walston, because you're used to him being kind of like, of course, you saw him, several years earlier as the teacher, of course, in Fast Times at Richmond High. And so you're expecting someone a little more stern, but he was kind of like, he was kind of like, he turned out to be the cool guy, and he would see the kids every morning do their thing, whether he gets stuff knocked out of his hand or whatever, in a fun way. I love seeing Ray Walston in this.
Okay, guys, next up, I got to do this. Our Ocean's 11 question, do you think we need one more? Do we need to add somebody to this cast? I have put some thought into this, I know who I would like. But Kevin, I'm going to let you go now. Do you have somebody you would like to add into the cast of RAD?
When I look at other actors that were of this age that we were watching growing up, obviously you think of the cast of Goonies, which came out the year before. It would have been nice if we had another like big name character in this film that actually might have helped with the movie billing a little bit. I know there's probably budget issues and stuff like that, but I would have liked to have seen maybe a Sean Astin, or even like Drew Barrymore or something like that. Just someone with name power of that age that would have been kind of cool. Maybe someone not quite Brat Packy yet, but someone, as we said recently, if you watch the movie Brat Pack adjacent, just someone that would not necessarily be one of the racers, maybe a friend or someone like that, just to bring a little more oomph to it.
Lacey, what about you? Who would you add one more to the cast?
Well, I was gonna say it would be fun to do like a BMX bandits kind of crossover situation, but now that Kevin said what he said, I would watch James Spader in this movie. I would watch James Spader like be one of the bad guys, like
Yeah. Funny you say that real quick, because he was a really good bad guy in a movie that did star. I think it came out the year before this, called The New Kids, where Lori Loughlin and her brother are in this new town, and he plays a really horrible person.
Yep.
And the movie gets nasty. It's very 80s style, but I thought that would be a good call out right there.
Okay, so I have my one more, and I put a lot of thought into this. And Kevin, I think you will truly appreciate this. You know what this town was missing? It was missing the young skateboard punk to make fun of all the BMXers. We needed a young Tony Hawk in this movie as the town skateboard punk, given her harassing the BMXers.
You know what? I like that. I think that would have been great, but it would also been kind of cool to not necessarily maybe be like to harass them, but it would have been nice to see a little crossover of the stuff that we all had, because I know kids have skateboards too, because you had skateboards if you couldn't afford a cool bike as well. And so that would have been kind of cool to see like Tony Hawk like doing some tricks in the back or something like that. That would have been neat.
So yeah, that was my thought on it. But up next, guys, we're gonna do this a little differently. This is, of course, the Tom Selleck was Indiana Jones segment. Who almost got the role or passed on it? Well, there wasn't a lot of casting things with this, but the character of Cru Jones was actually loosely based off of a very famous BMXer, and that is Eddie Fiola, who did most of Bill Allen's stunts in the film. Eddie Fiola was a very famous BMX rider in the 80s. Maybe considered one of the top in the world at the time, Kevin.
Yeah, and I'm glad you have this picture up here. You see an older version of him here, and then you see him back in his heyday on the cover of BMX Action magazine, which is so cool. Mongoose Test, BMX Words of Contest. And what's interesting too, this brings up another thing about it too, is like it really depended on where you were, of like what type of tricks that you could do, because then you had the empty pool riders, obviously, or you had the ramp riders, and you didn't always have access to those things unless you got really, really good. Then you know where like all the ramps were, or you got sponsored and you'd be traveling to these situations. And he was a good freestyle rider as well as like a ramp and pool rider as well. I don't know if I'm using the right terminology anymore because I'm old now, but there were certain types, and then like, maybe you did more freestyle where you had the pegs that pop down on the front and the back, and you could stand on things, and if you couldn't get near there. But Eddie was one of those all over great riders.
Yeah. And of course too, if you watch the opening and closing of this movie, Eddie and several of the BMX riders are doing stunts through the opening credits and closing credits. I know, Lacey, you were very fascinated by that.
Yes, it was really cool. I mean, it really did feel like the opening and closing credits of Breakin', but yeah, it was really cool. They just had bikes with their dancing.
Yeah. Okay, guys, this one's easy. The types of vehicles. There's only one choice, and it's BMX bikes. I mean, this is a movie pure BMX, but I mean, Kevin, these were some dang nice bikes in this movie for BMX. They dropped some money on the equipment in this film.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised to save money if some of these BMXers had their own bikes too as well. But it was one of those things where like, if you were wanting to emulate these people and you weren't as good enough and you couldn't be sponsored, you still did what you could to your bike. You put on the racing plate in the front, maybe you chose your favorite number, and but it was one of those things where like, if you weren't sponsored or anything, you didn't try to buy like the BMX, jerseys and pants and stuff. You might have had the parachute pants though, of course, Yeah, it was one of those things where like, are you going to wear if you don't have a mongoose bike, do you wear a mongoose bike? So I don't know. But yeah, bikes were definitely the big thing.
And this movie was a great, every bike company in this had representation in it. Lacey.
Do you remember, I think it was Kellogg's. I feel like it was like Tony the Tiger or Toucan Sam or something, where if you saved up your box tops for the cereal, you could then send in like 25 box tops or whatever and get a license plate for your bicycle.
Oh yes,
remember
yes,
that?
Like,
I remember that being like the big deal. Everybody in elementary school was like,
Well, I did want to give a shout out to the vehicle in the parade that Lori Loughlin character was riding, because if you were sponsored, you had those cool like trucks or vans or whatever that would, with the name of the sponsor on it, and then you had the the bikes either like on the top or something like that. So I had to give a shout out to that, because that was something you would see at racing events or at events where they were doing like open competitions to try and, find the next big bike rider.
Now, Kevin, I do have a question for you, Lacey. It applies to you as well. Did you ever have a number on your bike?
Oh yeah. Yep.
Mine had a flower.
Yeah.
Because Kevin, I was in the South and I was the female.
Yeah.
Kevin,
and that's what we got.
Yeah. What was your bike number, Kevin?
Oh, it was number 8. Number 8 has always been my favorite number. And because I always thought it looked cool, but also too, back when I was a kid, everyone thought 7 was the coolest number because it was lucky number 7. I'm like, nah, 8 is. Why? Because it's one better.
I was 16.
16? Yeah.
Yeah. So, guys, we're about to get this podcast is about to take a left turn because it's about to get real fun. Ladies and gentlemen, it is the Zoolander. They look so hot right now. Your favorite costume or fashion moment from the movie, and we're just gonna go right into it. The twins and the dance, the hair, the dress, the tiger stripe. A little piece of trivia for you, Kevin. You might. The jumpsuits that these twins were wearing, did they seem a little familiar to you?
To me, they look like something out of Michael Jackson's Captain EO.
I will one up you on this. Rod and Rex's dance suits were borrowed from V.
There you go. Not only that, they were wearing them at the dance.
Yes. And how much Aquanet does she have going right there, Lacey?
All of it. All of it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All of it.
I'm going. That is a toucan. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see this. If you're listening on a podcast, I implore you to go to our YouTube page and watch this section, because
she's using it for the bra trick too, because you'll note that she's wearing a halter top, and so there was the hack was that you could pull your shirt out and spray and then stick your shirt and it would stay if you were going braless. So I'm saying like she used like 7 cans of Aquanet. Like all of the Aquanet is in this picture.
But it gets better, because here we have, of course, our 2 stars, Lori Loughlin and Bart Allen. Cru Jones in his RAD racing team outfit, while Lori Loughlin is wearing her very stylized mongoose, which Kevin, and then I think Lacey even brought this up, had a very low V-neck to it.
This by far is one of the best outfits in 80s of all time. This is the outfit that she is wearing at the end of, the big race at Helltrack. And boy, was it form fitting. And boy, yes, there was a low V cut and she was hot.
Do you have the photo? Do you have the straight on photo of it?
Unfortunately, I could not find a good straight on photo.
Yeah. It's the weirdest thing though. If you look at it, it looks so bizarre, because it looks like she's wearing a white skin tight leather, onesie with a bathing suit painted on it that's yellow, and then like weird like gloves that go all the way up to her shoulders. It's the weirdest thing, because for a second there I was like, what on earth is she? Oh, okay, there's more to it. It looked, I was so confused.
I was not confused about the design. I was confused about how it was making me feel.
Okay, well, moving on before Kevin talks about hitting puberty. The most iconic piece of clothing from this, as we'll see Lacey wearing, and in fact, here, Lacey, give me just a minute. I want to bring you up. You can see it there. That is, of course, the Team RAD Racing shirt, which they sold quite a few of, and a certain entrepreneur might have bought a whole bunch of them so they could qualify for the race. But guys, yeah, the classic RAD Racing shirt right there. Kevin's, of course, sporting his version with kind of the shadow version of the RAD logo, which was a very cool design with kind of the graffiti look and everything.
Yeah,
everything to it. But yeah, the RAD Racing shirt, which I believe you can still buy on Amazon, TeePublic, all those great places you can buy shirts at. And
one note: if you buy it on Amazon, it runs like 2 sizes too big. Like for serious.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you buy it on Amazon, get it like 2 sizes small.
Okay, guys. Next up, of course, we have got the Harry Met Sally scene. Best scene or moment between two characters. Now, Lacey, Kevin, I'm going to kind of let you guys have an opportunity to throw out maybe what might be your favorite scene between two characters. Lacey, ladies first.
Okay, it's not 2, it's 3. It's the dance. It's the twins and the dancing. I just don't. I mean, don't get me wrong. The Lori Loughlin dance.
You mean this right here?
But yeah, what they're doing like push-ups, and she's like just shaking her butt in the background, and they're doing I mean, it's just. I really feel like that's a relationship between the two of them, and she's just there to make it not look weird, and it's not working. It's just.
I don't know. There's certain movies where it gets even weirder, but that's a whole other thing.
It's yeah. Mm-hmm.
What about you, Kevin? Do you have a favorite moment between two characters?
You know, that's a good one right there. But I like the scene when Lori Loughlin and the character of Cru, when they are just together and getting to know each other. And I like the scene in the convenience store. And then, of course, the scene that has montage with music with the sliding and stuff like that. So, yeah.
Yeah.
I do think that it was nice that the scene where the cop, they go off running and you think that they're going to get in trouble, but then it turns out that he's like racing with them, as kind of like a daily thing that he kind of does he kind of chases them down during their paper route every morning to see if he can beat his own time, which is kind of cool. So that just kind of shows the small townness of it, where the cop's not going to bust you. He's going to, egg you on a little bit.
Kyle, are we going to get into our favorite scenes overall in the film, or?
We will get into that. Yeah. Okay. But I wanted to share my favorite scene between two characters. When Cru is trying to accomplish the backflip, and Lori Loughlin's character of Christian gives him the advice of, you need to remove the mattresses, but I'll kill myself.
Especially those mattresses, because it looked like there was a couple of murders on a few of those.
So let's get into it, Kevin. What are some of your favorite scenes from this film?
My favorite scene is the dance scene. I mean, it is so ridiculous, not just with the outfits, but how Lori Loughlin, I keep forgetting her character's name, and then Cru.
Christian.
What's that?
Christian was her name.
Christian, yeah. So, we find out she knows some tricks by herself, of course, with clever editing and stand-in stunt people. They're doing this dance on the bikes in the center of this dancing. So that was definitely probably my favorite scene, but I have some runner-ups too. Kyle,
okay. Well, no, hold on, because we are going to get more into that particular scene here very shortly.
Okay. The other scene I like too is where you don't know if the cop is on their side or not, and he's kind of running, with the cop and stuff like that. And what I just realized too is this is an '86 film. One of my favorite Arnold Schwarzenegger films, called Raw Deal, is an '86 film, and both in the beginning of these films there is a chase scene where you have someone on a bike going through I guess kind of like this film too, where he's being chased and you see Cru on top of all of the cut down pieces of wood, and there's a chase scene in the beginning, near the beginning of Raw Deal where he's chasing someone on a bike that goes over one of those as well. I thought that was kind of funny.
Nice.
Lacey, what about you? Any favorite scenes?
You know, I did enjoy the actual racing scenes. I'm not a sports ball person. I'm not a sporty kind of person. It's just not my thing. But if it involves cars, tractor, like trucks or monster trucks or bikes, I'm in. Like it's yeah, I find that to be fascinating.
I'd like to piggyback on that. That race scene was done really well. I remember when we were watching it together, we were commenting on it as if we were there watching it live and happen, because they did a really good job of showcasing the race, showcasing people crashing, showing some really cool moments of some of the players doing some dirty deeds while, trying to knock people off their bikes and stuff. And I want to give a shout out to director Hal Needham on this, because if you know who Hal Needham is, he is really good at doing movies with racing. And it felt like he did like 10,000 movies with Burt Reynolds, because he did all those Burt Reynolds,
maybe
racing.
Because he did do 10,000 movies with Burt Reynolds.
Yes.
Yeah.
And of course, he did one of our favorite movies, of course, Megaforce, which they had fancy cars and bikes and racing. So he knew how to showcase vehicles, is my point. And he did an excellent job with that last race scene.
Yeah, I got some fun stuff on that coming up here. But guys, let's talk about sex.
Baby.
Yeah, it's the Salt and Pepper. Let's talk about sex. And we are going to answer the eternal question of this, the romance of this movie, and we are going to finally show you what ass sliding is all about. This is probably the most romantic scene in the movie, when Christian and Cru go ass sliding, which this is in the 80s, so you can probably go, and this was where this was filmed, you could probably go up and the water was pretty clean, but yes, they have this little slide that goes down into the river, and they call it ass sliding. Now, I'm just thinking, not only was it ass sliding, but they also froze their asses off, because that water was ice freaking cold, Kevin.
Well, they were filming this in Canada. And there's certain scenes like when he's doing the trick with the bike, and he's trying to, chat with one of the popular girls, and you could see it, and like outside the dance, you could see like Lori Loughlin's character talking, and like you could see, her breath. And so, yeah. And I can only imagine that water had to be cold, as you know what.
Yeah. Well, Lacey, we tried to have a summer movie, and they were also filming this in the fall in Canada, mind you.
Well, and I think that might be why they're wearing like full on. I mean, and again, it was the 80s, so tracksuits were just sort of fashion at that point. But they're wearing, when they go ass sliding, they're wearing full length, like long sleeves, long pants, shoes, like tennis shoes, not small like Keds, but like full on like high tops. They had to have some sort of like neoprenes, like scuba suits on underneath or whatever. But it's just bizarre, because it looks, it looks like an old mining shaft that they used to use to dump the dirt from the top to let it go all the way down, and it would filter all the way down.
Or since we saw like logging being done.
Yeah, or logging.
Like you would take down the finished log that you cut down, and you put it down the chute. Yeah. It would go down to the river, and then they would like put it on a boat and take it down the river or something,
Right. It's the weirdest.
But I would have totally done this.
Oh, 100%. I would have been on that flume. Like that would have been, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, guys. Up next, it's movie soundtrack time. And if you're going to talk about RAD, we are talking about it is one of the greatest 80s movie soundtracks. And it is one of the greatest 80s movie soundtracks, because if you can't get Kenny Loggins to do your 80s movie soundtrack, you got John Farnham. And there's not one, not two, but 3 songs on this soundtrack performed by John Farnham. Break the Ice, which was the opening and closing theme of the film. He also performed the love theme from RAD, which was the music they used during the ass sliding scene. And of course, during the main races, Thunder in Your Heart, performed by John Farnham. These are all classic 80s, especially Break the Ice and Thunder in Your Heart. Just pump you up, get you into the movie, get you going. Kevin, I know you're a John Farnham fan.
Well, what's funny about that? I had always heard of John Farnham because he had done soundtracks for other movies. And I think for American audiences, that's where most people would remember him from. And he has a fantastic voice. And, I'm just going to, all of his, was it 3 songs that you mentioned? Yeah. He's fantastic. My favorite my favorite song from the soundtrack is probably Send Me an Angel, performed by Real Life. I love that 80s song. But I did want to go back to John Farnham here because he's actually much bigger in Australia as a recording and kind of pop star, and in England as well, because he really found his fandom found him in Australia. And I really recommend that you look for a documentary, because I actually ended up watching this in Australia last year, because it came out in 2003, called John Farnham Finding His Voice. And I think it's probably streaming somewhere, but I actually saw it in the theater with my wife and her mom because of how popular John Farnham is. And I did want to mention here, John Farnham is regarded as Australia's top performing artist with a career spanning 3 decades. He was born in England, but he immigrated to Australia in 1959 at the age of 10. And you get to see in this documentary about him growing up, finding his voice, and his first big hits and such like that. And what's really cool is you get to see other pop stars like Olivia Newton-John talk about him, and other rock stars that you do recognize if you don't quite know who John Farnham is as an American audience. But if you go to Australia, he is considered the reigning pop star there because of how popular that he was. And unfortunately, he did pass away over the last several years, if I remember correctly, with some health issues that he had. But John Farnham, basically, whenever you bring up this movie, especially with my wife, the first thing that she says, John Farnham. She doesn't care about the BMXing. She doesn't care about any of that. It's John Farnham.
Lacey, what about you? What were your feelings on the soundtrack? Because it is definitely an 80s soundtrack.
I recognize Send Me an Angel. I still don't know who John Farnham is. I'm just not a music person. I just don't.
Okay. Yeah,
I'm terrible with music. I just have such a limited range when it comes to music.
So, Kevin, I'm glad you mentioned Send Me an Angel, because I put this aside too, because Send Me an Angel was also in another very timely 80s film, because it was used as one of the love themes in Teen Wolf 2.
Teen Wolf 2, Jason Bateman.
Yes. But there was another reason why I'm so glad you brought up Send Me an Angel, because I think it fits very importantly into our next section. Are you sure that wasn't real? The best special for this movie, we might not call it the best special effects scene ever, because we are going to be talking about Bicycle Boogie, baby.
Now, okay, hold on. Okay, there was no special effects done for this scene, but you got to really give it up to a couple of things to make these scenes work. First of all, the actor itself for certain close-ups for faking it. Then you got the real people doubling as the real people doing it, and then the editor.
Okay, you mean like faking it like Bill Allen is doing here?
Okay, I'm more talking about Lori Loughlin.
We're going to get to that. We're going to get to that because, of course, here we have a couple of the actual stunt writers.
Look, Lori Loughlin has a beard.
Yeah, exactly. But this might be the most classic shot from RAD. Lori Loughlin, she's actually standing on a table, if I remember what I read about this correctly. They kind of have the bike behind her, and she's doing this, and you're like, yeah, there is no way in physics she keeps her balance.
If I ever met Lori Loughlin for an autograph at a convention, I would have her sign 2 things. It would be the cover of Secret Admirer and a still shot of this picture right here.
Yeah. because she has got the bedazzled blouse going, everything with the spotlight. That is a sign it and frame it and put that on your wall picture.
And Lacey referred to the other picture where you could tell it was an obvious stunt double, a male doing the trick, and it looked like he had a beard.
And you also have to give it to the lighting in this scene. The lighting, it was done with such a soft focus on her face that even when they did the swaps and stuff, it was, I mean, they tried real hard. They tried very hard.
And Kyle, as you said, Send Me an Angel was playing during this scene. It's so funny because it kind of can go both ways, because she's looking for someone else to like, carry the torch for Mongoose or whatever. So like the guy could be the angel, or the obvious here. You could look at, as a young teenage boy, you're looking at Lori Loughlin going, oh no, she's the angel.
Exactly.
As Lacey shakes her head.
I've never seen so many pairs of white pants in one movie before. So many pairs of white pants.
Yeah, that was the thing. It was popular.
Yeah, it was a lot, man.
Well, up next, the Fall Guy, the stunts and award for best stunt scene, guys. This is my favorite right here, right? When we saw earlier in the film when Cru was trying to perfect the rotation flip for his BMX, and then the stunt rider does it right in the middle of Helltrack. It was a great scene, amazingly filmed. And Kevin, you talked about this a little earlier. Hal Needham knew how to shoot this, and he shot it so well.
Yeah, he was able to find the best out of these professional bike riders, and I would love to have like been a fly on the wall where he's meeting with these stunt riders, and also the ones that are participating for real, I guess, in the scenes, or either being themselves, and going, I need to make sure you guys look good. I need to make sure that, because this is the payoff, this scene, the Helltrack, and obviously these guys being doubles, they're being able to do these tricks, being able to ride these bikes and over the whoop-de-doos and all this type of stuff. They're basically stunt riders, that have obviously been brought onto this film because they're famous for what they do. And it's cool that he pulled from these people to do these stunts, pretending to be like some of the cast members and stuff like that. And then obviously some of them being really themselves.
Yeah, and of course we mentioned it earlier, the Helltrack drop and the camera angle here.
Oh God!
I mean, they look like they're almost going completely straight down. A 25 drop.
Part of this is a full vertical drop until it starts to not be vertical. And this picture you have up here of that drop is insane. It gives me the heebie-jeebies because I sure as hell would not have tried to go down that drop.
It makes you wonder too, with the Helltrack and how it was designed out, how long it took to actually get some of those things to work right. Because you watch that now, and even now, there's like, yeah, people got hurt. People got hurt. Okay, guys, Twin Suns location, filming location, or set piece. Yes, Lacey.
I didn't get to talk about my favorite stunt.
Oh,
I'm so sad. I'm so sad. No.
What was your favorite?
Let's get her do it. What is it?
The funny thing is, for me, it's not the ones that succeeded. I liked watching all the crazy wipeouts that they did, like in the middle of the Helltrack. It's like the number of times the three of us all went. Ooh,
especially when we were watching, because that scene that when each time a race around the track ends, they have to do that jump onto the starting ramp again. Mm-hmm. And you see guys doing the short, like they don't quite make it.
The one guy wipes out. I think there was one guy who wiped out like 3 times during.
Yeah, the pink guy. The pink guy was in it like 3 times.
Yeah.
Oh man. Anyway, sorry.
Okay. So Twin Suns' favorite filming location or set piece. There's only one answer here, guys. It's Helltrack. Helltrack is one of the coolest set pieces ever, and I found this pic of when they were building Helltrack.
Oh,
you kind of cool. see the skeleton there, and if you look, that blue ramp there, that is the drop that we were talking about as they tried to hop onto the starting ramp again, and that really kind of shows you just how perilous that actually was and how high up it was as well. Lacey, you had a thought.
Yes, I will say that during the original trials, they have one shot that's repeated several times where they have to start at the top of this. It's like a wooded area, and they have to come down this one area. It's easily a 30-degree or 45-degree incline where they have to go straight down over like branches and trees and knobs and rocks and stuff to get to so that they can qualify. That was a pretty cool setup.
If you look at this track right here too, there's like no guardrails on any of these ramps and stuff like that. So it's easy for you to get pushed off that look like maybe a 8 to 10 foot drop there, And then you gotta like get your bike and get back on the track or go behind and then start and get back on again, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But come on, guys. The most important thing about Helltrack is the only bike race where you can ride through a bowl of cereal.
Yeah.
Right? The first 3 times they went around, I was like, is that a wheelbarrow? Like a really big wheelbarrow? No, it's a giant spoon in a bowl of kicks.
Yep. It was a sponsored bowl of cereal by Kix, which was a very popular, cereal at the time.
Talk about product placement. I mean,
yeah. What a great way to do that. But I also wanted to give a shout out to the restaurant, the pizza. I think it was a pizza place. Is that what it was?
Yeah.
Where Cru worked, because that was a good way for the kids to socialize and they're getting each other's faces and stuff like that. I thought that was a good scene too. And these obviously were all real locations too.
And the comic book store was pretty cool. Like
it was the convenience store. That was all the convenience store.
Okay.
Because I remember we paused it because, as we mentioned earlier, we were trying to figure out, wait a minute, which G.I. Joe issue was that? And in case you're wondering, I can tell you it was G.I. Joe issue number 41. It was the battle for Cobra Island begins, and you see a very beat up Gung Ho with Snake Eyes and the rest of the G.I. Joe crew behind him fighting it out.
Okay, guys, here's the big question: if you were a non-speaking extra on set, what scene do you want to be in?
The dance. The dance. I need to be like just on the wall, just going.
Okay. I would not be on the wall. I'd be doing what now I'm gonna call the Jean-Claude Van Damme background scene stealing moves.
Nice.
I would be back there trying to do some type of dopey dance in my whatever 80s outfit that I would have, trying to do this type of thing and maybe do a little pop and locking in the back. And so that's what I would be doing, but I would definitely be at that dance scene.
Probably most answers would be the dance.
Or basically, like you learned in the movie Hitch, you just be the white guy dance, just kind of doing this type of thing.
Yeah. Okay, guys. The Luke and Leia kiss cringe-worthy moment or scene, and any pet peeves for Rad. Kevin, you kind of burst out in laughter, so guess what? You're on the clock.
I mean, when you look at a lot of, especially the dance scene, and you look at I guess some of the cringe-worthy scene is the outfits. Like there are those two like really hot blonde girls in their outfits. They're so dated. But then they're so cool, depending on who you talk to and who it is, definitely. And you could say it's a pet peeve, but you have to look at it. It was a low budget film. This is basically a B grade film. The acting is not good, when it comes to certain characters. But you could throw those out there, but I'm just going to forgive all that because it's Rad.
Lacey, cringeworthy moment, pet peeves.
Legitimately, every time he talks to his mother, because every scene with his mother ends in like a "oh mom" kind of a thing where he's just like like, you don't understand, which is, I know it was the 80s and that's the answer to any, that's the teenage answer to everything in 80s movies, but like his response, because Talia Shire, she's an amazing actress. She's been in amazing movies, and it was hard. I felt for her in those scenes, because the dialogue I don't know that the dialogue was really kind of there for her.
So that's kind of my pet peeve in this is, who had blackmail on Talia Shire to get her to be in this movie in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, she and Ray Walston, I guess, were probably the best actors in this film. And of course, she obviously is one of the bigger names, of course, Rocky and all kinds of stuff, in the Godfather movies. But it's interesting because she was put into the wet blanket mom role, the mom that was stern and wanted the best things for her son, and blah blah blah, and she didn't understand this world and why he was spending his time doing all this type of stuff. But I would have liked to have seen a little bit more from her at the end, or I would have liked to have seen her come around more before the race started, not like during the middle at the end of the race.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Okay, guys, I'm king of the world. Career moment. Was an actor in this movie at the top of their career, or was anything else from this movie trending, newsworthy, tabloid popular when this movie was released? I'm just gonna say it. For Bart Connors, this was he said it himself. This is his career highlight, and I think the same could be said for Bill Allen. But Kevin, anything that's king of the world for you?
It's definitely the moment for these actors and maybe the twins, you know. But you really have to look at the bigger picture here, because what really outshines, because they didn't have any huge names in this movie, just, you know, Talia Shire, you know, pretty much, is BMX. BMX is king of the world at this time. Is the reason why this film, and because they nailed everything about BMX in this, whether it was, you know, how important it was to be sponsored. That was such a big deal. There was so much pressure put on. And especially when it came down to the rules and regulations, they were trying to stop, you know, Cru of getting in and being sponsored. They would throw another curve at him. You know, there's all these things about you have to be sponsored, And that was a huge thing, that if you were sponsored, it was just like you were a rock star among your friends and your family if you were able to get everything paid for you and all that kind of stuff. And so that's why I think that BMX is king of the world and above everything else in this film.
Okay, which leads me to Lacey. Give me your king of the world, and then I got a follow-up question for Kevin.
I think this is really Lori Loughlin's kind of kicking off point. She had a couple of roles, and then there's this that maybe she was trying to get out of the I mean, in the night before, she was kind of the mean girl, and then in Private, Secret Admirer, she was kind of a little bit like the girl next door. So I think she was trying to kind of expand her brand a little bit, and I think that she managed to do that.
So you're not saying Encino Man wasn't her king of the world?
No.
Honestly, I think for Lori Loughlin,
I mean,
it's Full House.
Okay,
but
when you look back now, she's the big draw of this film. If you think about it, you know, I mean, 83, she was Amityville 3D. The New Kids movie was 85, followed by Secret Admirer in 85, and then RAD in 86. You know, you could say that, you know, because Secret Admirer was probably, it was one of those films that really kind of found its home a little bit later on home video, because that's how I found it. So RAD was probably, as Lacey's saying, that was probably the movie that really kind of pushed her up there, and then people were going back and looking at other stuff, you know.
Okay, one more quick King of the World question. Is RAD the King of the World movie for BMX, or is it BMX Bandits?
Say what was the last thing you said, Kyle?
I said, is RAD the King of the World movie for BMX, or is it BMX Bandits? Because those are the two movies that seem to be fighting for the title. For me, it's RAD. I'm going to be straight up. For me, it's RAD. I think RAD is more of a true BMX film.
You know, I know. I'm going to let you comment on that first, Lacey. What do you think?
I think that BMX Bandits had more of it was a little bit more relatable. You know, they were, because it was kind of it was the team trying to be, it wasn't one guy, you know? So I feel like that's a little bit more relatable. As far as like the bike, you know, the sport of it all, I would say RAD. But as far as movie wise, I would say BMX Bandits was a better film.
Lacey's got some good points there. I think I want to put a poll and ask people about this, because I'm really, really curious about this, Kyle, because I think that BMX Bandits has gotten more mention because of Nicole Kidman, because there's always those memes of like, there's that famous Sean Astin meme of how people know him. It's like, oh, he's from Stranger Things. And someone says, no, he's from Lord of the Rings. Like, no, he's from Goonies, you know? And I feel like with her career, it was like, you know, she became probably, you know, really famous during Far and Away. And then, of course, with
Days of Thunder.
Days of Thunder. But, we're like, no, I remember her from BMX Bandits, that type of thing. And I feel like that gets more mentioned than RAD does. But in a way, and Lacey's right, it feels relatable too, especially with the adventure side of it, because they're dealing with some criminals, and there's also like a really cool, like it felt like a 20-minute chase scene in around through Sydney Harbor, when you watch that, because you see some really cool areas of because they filmed it in around Sydney. And and also too, your lead star is a girl as well, and you did see girls competing in BMX, but you didn't see them at the level that we see them in RAD, unfortunately. But there was always those cool girls that you saw on bikes and on skateboards, and you might have had crushes on them when you were kids. But I would have to say probably right now, and I could be wrong, Kyle, but I think it's BMX Bandits.
I think BMX Bandits definitely benefits from the Nicole Kidman connection and the push it gets from that. I personally am still going to go RAD. I think RAD is more of the true spirit of the BMX world that was existing at that time.
I felt like, though, the home video rental of BMX Bandits was doing a lot better than RAD was. I feel like there was more. And plus, for us that didn't have the home box office HBO like premium thing, we saw BMX Bandits on regular television more than RAD, if I remember, too.
Yeah.
Well, and let's face it, RAD is about BMX. BMX Bandits is about 3 kids who have BMX bikes.
Yeah.
So, like, defining the statement a little bit more, then RAD's definitely your BMX, king of the world. But story, plot line, availability for, it just feels a little bit, for me, it's going to be BMX Bandits because it was a little bit more relatable. Yeah.
We talk about an ultimate VHS double feature.
Yeah, no kidding.
Right?
Yeah. Okay, guys. I do have a nuke it for more hot take about this movie.
Okay.
I could have put this in my nitpicks, but no. This is a nuke it for more. This movie should have ended much sooner. As we know, if you've watched RAD, the quote unquote villain Duke is constantly trying to find ways to get Cru Jones eliminated from Helltrack. This was really simple. In the qualifying race scene, in the third race, when Cru wipes out and tries to catch up, he goes out of bounds off the racetrack and onto the cement to get more speed and traction than he would on the thing, allowing him to finish third and qualify for Helltrack. Cru Jones should have been disqualified.
Realistically, he technically cheated 3 times in that same race because every time they had to all go down that one slope, he always cut through the trees.
Yeah, but he went blatantly out of bounds in front of everybody there. So just saying, that is my hot take on RAD. Do either of you guys have a hot take before
I have one. It might not be popular, but my wife Erin and I have had this thing when it comes to movies and looking back at all these, and I've mentioned it before that whenever we talk about the soundtrack of these 80s films and even 90s as well, you can go back to the 70s too, there was always kind of a debate, and we call it did the soundtrack and or song from the movie, did it outlast the movie? Or is the movie better than the soundtrack, and the soundtrack was just a component to the film? So we call it is the song better than the movie, or is the movie better than the songs? And my hot take is the soundtrack could be considered better than the movie, because this soundtrack is on point. And every time RAD is brought up, almost always someone brings up the soundtrack that know what they're talking about. So you could say the soundtrack's better than the movie if you're not nostalgically pulled into the BMX world, if you were part of it.
I think that's fair.
I'm going to say the same thing for the costuming. The costuming in this movie was better than the movie. Like, that costume designer, that poor woman, or whoever, wow. That was a situation that she he dealt with a situation on a daily basis.
Are you saying that they should have gotten like a B-movie Oscar, or they should have been fired?
No, I'm saying that she really did capture the moment as far as the 80s are concerned. Like, she whoever it was, like they win. She won.
I forgot a pet peeve, by the way. Why was Ray Walston riding his bike like 20 feet each day and seeing if his coffee would get knocked out by a newspaper?
I feel like that's
better to do. It was a small town.
right.
Okay, but the next thing is, guys, what happened next? What happens after, possibly going a couple days after this? I mean, Cru Jones wins Helltrack, which is supposed to be the Super Bowl of BMXing, and not only does what happened next, that also leads into my question of sequel, prequel, reboot, or remake, or are we just leaving RAD alone? So combination, are we getting a sequel? Are we remaking this? And what happened the next day? Because I have thoughts, but Kevin, Lise, do you have anything?
Lacey, you go first.
Yeah. I think Christian and who's the bad guy? The lead who lost? What's his name?
Bart Taylor.
Yeah, I think he joins the team. I think that the twins probably stay because you can't have too many leaders in one little small group. I think it's going to be RAD 2, and it's going to be like old friends versus new, kind of a whatever. I think that the CEO head honcho guy is going to lose a bunch of money and be really angry about it, and he's going to be doubly invested in getting back at them to revitalize the Mongoose name. Yeah. Also, Talia Shire understands how much money he can make from doing this and makes him promise that after 5 years of racing, he'll go back to college and get his degree once he breaks too many legs or something.
Kevin?
I'm going to steal a sequel from one of my favorite guilty pleasure movies in series. I would like to have seen RAD 2 Back to the Streets. And I'm referring to, of course, a certain dance film series that had Back to the Streets. I think it was Step Up Part 2 or whatever it was. And I could see him becoming part of the team, but I'd like to have seen him like go to parts of America. And since he's the hometown kid that was able to fight his way up through this kind of sponsor management, fiasco, I would like to him being a recruiter himself, but also waiting for like whenever the next big race is, with even a bigger track in some of these other places that they had in the States, but finding those kids that couldn't afford the big bikes, that knew the tricks, and going down to Southern California or going down to Florida or something like that, and finding these kids doing these tricks in empty pools and stuff like that, and getting them to join the team. That would have been a really cool.
Heading down to Australia, finding criminals.
There you go. Yeah, go to another country. That would be another continent.
Guys,
yeah. Something like that. But
you,
I don't know if you could really do a reboot unless you really want to. You have to go back to the 80s and reboot it and do it that way. But it would have been nice to have seen a sequel. That would be like what happens next, So yeah.
You guys got it all wrong. RAD needs the Cobra Kai treatment. It's years later. We find out that Cru Jones lost his BMX career due to a tragic ass sliding accident where he blew out his knee.
I would believe a BMX crash, but not an ass sliding thing. Come on, Kyle.
It has to be ass sliding, Kevin. It has to be ass sliding.
We're going to be here a little bit. Christian runs off with Bart. They have a baby. Bart gets killed in a tragic accident trying to relive his glory days in the X Games. But Christian finds a down and out Cru Jones and reinvigorates him as he rehabs himself and teaches their son the ways of BMX, and he becomes an X Games star.
This only works if she's already pregnant with Bart's kid.
Well, yeah,
going back and forth is just not going to happen.
No. This is like 15 years later. 15, 16 years later. So
okay.
There we go. RAD Kai is coming. I'm just
RAD Kai. You know, it's funny though. You brought up something like I'm part of a couple of Facebook groups about filming locations, and you see fans go to their favorite movies or TV section, and they'll take a picture of them where the famous scene is, and they'll usually give the address of it. I actually would love to find out if that ass sliding chute is still there and like recreate that scene. That would be great.
Yeah.
If you and Kyle want to recreate that scene, I will take the photo.
Yeah. No.
Let's do it. Let's go up to Canada. Kyle, come on.
I grew up around that freezing water. No, thank you.
Talk about a wet blanket. Jeez.
Oh, well, speaking of that, movies that you can't make today. Can we make RAD today?
You
It'd
could.
be much more.
It's not. I mean, movies that you can't make today are usually can't because of some sort of misogyny or racism or something terrible, some sort of bad thing. There wasn't
or some social commentary at the time.
Yeah, I don't think there was anything.
Or language, or something that you can't say today.
There was no negative. I mean, it was kind of a wholesome. Honestly, it was kind of a wholesome movie. When ass sliding is the only bad word, really. I mean, there really wasn't a whole lot of bad anything. What's the rating on it? I don't even know.
It's not
even PG-13, is PG, and this is after the PG-13 rating was established.
It's interesting, when you go back or when you watch films that take place in the 80s, sometimes it's done well and sometimes it's not. They'll you can tell it's like a copy of the 80s because they've gone out and throw in some like obvious stuff. Where I'm looking at the non-obvious stuff are they pulling off, and it would be interesting for them to go back in time and make a remake of it, but it takes place in the 80s, but they need to do it right. They need to get the right cars, they need to get the right outfits. And obviously when you brought up earlier, Lacey, the fashion in this thing, obviously we're looking at like what the rich kids could have or what people were wearing to the prom. But if you look at the everyday outfits of what people were wearing, that's what you need to get right, and how much people were either, doing certain things and what cars that people were doing, not just the obvious stuff that makes it look 80s. You got to get the background right, and I would love to see them, especially now with X Games being a thing and these BMX biking is still a thing. It would be nice for them to go back and revisit this and do not maybe a remake, but maybe just in that world of BMX biking.
Mm-hmm.
All I'm going to say is Helltrack in the era of X Games scares the living hell out of me.
Yeah.
That's what I'm thinking is if you did it today, I wouldn't go back to the 80s. I would morph it into Helltrack. I mean, into like game situation.
Yeah.
Or qualifiers for X Games.
Yeah. Okay, guys. Final thoughts as we get ready to close out this episode of this radical episode of Couch Potato Theater. Give me your final thoughts on RAD. Lacey, I'm going to start with you.
Shoulder pads plus Aquanet equals yay.
Kevin?
I mean, yeah, that's all you need for RAD.
I didn't mention earlier, and I want to take this time to do it. I love that when they're getting to do the main race at the end of before Helltrack scene starts, you actually get an introduction of all of the bike riders. A lot of them were like famous BMXers. I thought that was a really cool shout out or a way to showcase these guys in it. But you know what, Kyle, you obviously sent me my copy of my DVD that I have right over here, and it was nice to revisit this. But more importantly, it was really nice to watch it with you guys in person. And yeah, that actual Blu-ray copy you have right there in your nerd cave, Lacey, and just bringing back all the memories of being part of that. Obviously, I didn't have one of the expensive bikes. I had some, probably it might have been a Schwinn, I don't remember. But boy, when you looked at it from a distance, it looked like an expensive bike. And, you know, this was a huge part of our culture that I feel like a lot of people that are younger than us really missed out on and really don't know a thing about it. Mm-hmm. And it's nice to be able to do a podcast about a movie like this, bring up not only our personal memories, but, you know, other little tidbits about it, of how there are just these certain movies that came out during this time that were about things that were happening to us at that age, you know, and You know, there, when you look at movies that had stuff to do with bike riding, you had BMX Bandits, you had RAD, you had E.T., you had Goonies, and maybe something snuck in on some of your favorite TV series as well.
Lacey?
I want to piggyback on that too, because if you think about today, I mean, think about it. In the 80s, we walked to school, we walked home from school, we threw our backpacks inside, we were free range children, come home before the streetlights turn on, right? And so now, like, there's that culture is gone because, safety, right? I mean, I didn't have pads. I didn't have elbow pads and a helmet, and I didn't have a helmet. I didn't have none of that. Like, it just wasn't a thing. And, the number of times I would be on my bike, and, my friend would have, the skateboard behind me, and he'd be holding on to the back of my bicycle, and then, waiting for me to get enough motion so that he could swing off when I took a turn. You get 2 cinder blocks and a 2x4, and you got a ramp.
Yeah, and there was always like, let's lay the kids down and jump over them stuff, and no one was wearing any protective gear. And also too, bikes were a sign of freedom for us as kids because before cars, we would go out, and our parents never knew where we went. They just said, just be back by dusk for dinner, or be back by 5 or 6 or whatever.
There were literally ads on television that said, like, every famous person out there, every MTV personality out there had a it's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are?
Yeah.
Ads on television to remind people that they had children and that they might not be in the home.
Yes.
That is the description of the 80s. That's all you need to know.
Yep, pretty much.
So for me, Kevin, you hit the point. I'm going with this. It's this slice of culture that really nobody can appreciate to this day. This is the precursor to X Games. This is a precursor to all of that extreme sport. But you also mentioned, especially growing up where I grew up, where we had such a limited time to be on our bikes. And luckily I lived in some place that had sunlight 24/7 during that time.
Wow.
so Yes, Kevin.
You did say something that this is like a precursor to the X Games, of stuff that would be showcased on the X Games.
Yeah.
And I did want to say that for me, the precursor to X Games was actually MTV Sports with Dan Cortez.
Oh yeah.
And I know because I was on an episode of that once, but not BMX, paintballing. But yeah, this was the stuff that was highlighted because you thought, did the BMX die in the 80s? No, they kept it going. Skateboarding kept it going. And I was reminded of this just the other day while I was riding my bike down near the beach where I live, and we have a skate park down there, and someone was teaching kids how to do really easy skateboard tricks. And I saw this little girl. She must have been like 8 or 9 years old. She had, of course, the elbow pads, the knee pads, the helmet on, and she was doing a small little elevator drop of about 8 inches. It was very sweet. And I like to see that these sports are living on with maybe different, cultural pushing it forward, but it's still the same stuff, and I just like, I would have loved to have seen some freestyle, someone doing some freestyle tricks, because if you weren't a good racer, you did freestyle,
Well, guys, with that, it is time to close out this episode of Couch Potato Theater here on the Fandom Podcast Network. And, of course, there's a lot of great ways to find the Fandom Podcast Network. First and foremost, if you're watching this on our YouTube channel, we thank you so much for watching. Please give us a like, give us a subscribe, share us out. We're always trying to grow the YouTube channel. And, of course, you can find all of the audio versions of our shows on our homepage at fpnet.podbean.com or on all of the major podcast catchers out there, including iTunes, iHeartRadio, Amazon, Spotify. We're everywhere. Of course, I am your host, Kyle. You can find me on X, aka Twitter, aka whatever you want to call it this week, at AKyleW. You can also find me on Instagram and Threads at AKyleFandom. You can find me on Discord at AKyleW. And if you want to follow me on Letterboxd too and see what I'm watching, you can follow me at KSport16. Kevin, where can people find you on social media?
You can find me on all of those on X, Instagram, Discord, Letterboxd, Threads, all at Spartan_Phoenix. And of course, you can find me here on the Fandom Podcast Network and Kevin on Facebook as well.
And Lacey, where can people find you on socials?
I am on all the places. I am on the Facebook and the Twitter and Blue Sky and Big Sky, Blue Sky,
Blue Sky.
Threads, Discord, Letterboxd, all Lacy Pants. That's me. And then Instagram, I'm the Lacy Pants.
And of course, too, this is Couch Potato Theater on the Fandom Podcast Network. You can find the Fandom Podcast Network on Facebook. Join our group page. We'd love to have you guys there. You can find us on Instagram at Fandom Podcast Network and on X at FanPod Network. Now, guys, I have an awesome BMX team here, Kevin.
I just want to give a shout out to Lacey. First of all, thank you for hosting us at your wonderful house there and enjoying your movie room and just going back to the 80s with, a couple of my best friends watching a movie in person and commenting on it and pausing it and watching wipeouts and watching, fashion moments and stuff. Lacey, thank you so much. That was so much fun.
I had a blast. When are you coming back?
I'm working on it.
Just whenever you're coming back, just let me know.
Yep, I echo those sentiments. And as we close out, just remember that these are the movies we love. And for this one in particular, find that thunder in your heart. And now I'm going to go try to break the ice because I'm definitely not going to try to break some bones doing those BMX tricks.
Find me in no.
Thank you for watching, and we will see you once again on the couch.